Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I wanted to talk about spies. And how is it that because I've been getting this question actually a couple times where players have asked me, boss, look, we have some situations going on in our alliance. How can you give us any advice? How would you go about addressing spies within the alliance, either finding them out, limiting how information is disseminated? How can we solve this potential hurdle? And so I thought to myself, well, this is something I've ran into quite a few times before, and I do actually think there are some solutions. I think there's some that can potentially work a little quicker, and then some that might be a little bit more of a long-term investment over time. So we're going to start off just with talking about in-game alliances. If I remember to maybe mention something about Discord, we'll touch on that a little bit later. However, let's start. I think I have about 7 or 8 here that we'll go through. So I think the first one is when it comes to spying, typically what the individuals are usually spying for if they join an alliance is with trying to do it during war times, right? So the thing about when you're in some type of a PvP scenario, if you are fighting in, let's say, kind of a Zone 3 for Season 1 or a Zone 4 for Season 2, most of the time that's typically what spying is being done for, is that you're trying to kind of get an edge on when is that alliance going to attack, where are they going to attack, how many people are potentially online, right? There's actually quite a bit of data that you can collect from an alliance just by being able to stay in there for a while. Again, I don't want to get into a lot of that nitty gritty. That might be a better said and spoken on for another video. However, that's kind of the overview or the objective of what you would typically be trying to do when you're in an alliance. So the first thing here is mails. I think when you're sending mails out, given, and someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong here, maybe I just haven't actually tested this yet, but when you go into an alliance, right, you can click on mail here. Now, from my understanding, there's not a way to filter this where you can send mails to specific ranks of players. Now, if there is, someone can let me know that. Again, I haven't messed around with it for a while, so maybe it came in an update that I missed, even though I know I read all of them, but there's a lot. So if y'all go to members, and you can see how there's a bunch of different ranks, right? I remember in Infinity Kingdom, you could send a mail specifically to R2s and below, just R1s, R3s and below, R4s and below, right? Obviously, at that point, R4s and below pretty much is everyone, because the lead is the one who's, well, unless you're the officer, right? Then I guess you'd be typing it. But if you wanted to limit it in one of those 3 ways, you could. Excuse me. And so the idea being that this is one of the ways you could do it, where, for example, if you send a mail out to a specific group, reason why this was somewhat effective is because you could basically figure out which group the spies more or less fell in, right? If you were noticing that, well, hey, the response time is fast, or it's too fast for them to be, or they're already ready and waiting when no one has said anything publicly, maybe only leadership as far as leads, R4s and R5 were the only individuals who knew exactly kind of where we'd be going, when we'd be going, right? That's something to consider too as well. And then the other side of that, which is kind of 1B, is, right, how detailed are you being in your mails or not? Because sometimes omitting or basically limiting specific types of information can be important. I'll give you an example. If you write a mail that says something to the effect of, hey, we want everyone to gather here at this point. These are our objectives for the day, and we're going to be starting at this time. So please, try to have as many people on as you can. I mean, it's pretty direct and pretty clear. Versus if you try to write something up on the opposite end, where you say, hey, we're going to do an offensive around this time, right? Please just have a territorial teleport ready, and we're going to have a lot of action. We will have space for everyone to move to, and what we will do is we will send out instructions. You could say, 5 or 10 minutes before it starts, right? That way, even if you have a spy, they either have to be online at that specific time in order to get the information, right, on where you're going to attack, because you're basically just telling everyone, hey, we're just going to kind of TP into a specific area. And let's say you've already set up your territory to where you have 2 or 3 or different attack points, right? If you do it that way, and you've also kind of scouted out where your enemies are, then either they're going to have to be forced to do the same thing, right? So you're kind of setting the stage more appropriately in that case, where you're making it so they have to then TP to you, force TPing themselves, also not being able to really know what you're going to be doing, or I should say where you're going to go, right? So even though sure they could be online around the same time, that can be a little bit more challenging. I think that's a little bit easier of a way to limit information, so that way, and also make it to where they have to be more, a lot more reactive. In that case, right? They can't really proactively utilize the information ahead of time because you haven't really disseminated anything worthwhile for the most part. Especially if you have multiple points of attack, it works out a little bit better. Then we get to the next one here, which is using DMs, right? So number 2 would be using direct messages, where instead of, like, let's say in this example, if you cannot send mails out to a specific rank and you can only send mails out to everyone, in that case, what you would do is you would send direct messages to a specific group, right? So let's say you send DMs to everyone that's an R3, R4 team should already be aware of it, and obviously the R5. And you send DMs to everyone and you say, guys, look, we're going to attack here at this time and do this. But then everyone else, you just tell them, right? But then everyone else, maybe you send another mail out that says something to the effect of, hey, write the generality mail that we referred to before. Or you DM the rest of the people and you just give them more of a general thing saying, hey, just if you want to get some PvP action, right, log in at this time, and then we'll give you some instructions a little bit before we start. And then you can kind of do that if you do multiple different campaigns, if you will, or attacking sessions. Then you can do that for the rank 3, do that for the rank 2 and the rank 1, right? Then you just kind of do the opposite. So you'll send the kind of specific message to a specific rank of players, but then you'll do the general DM to the others. Then that way you can kind of start figuring out what rank would the spy potentially fall in. And then at that point, you can start using some additional information. We'll get to that here in a moment. So then we get to number 3, when we're talking about kind of additional layers of verification. Typically, you'd want to also look at like main account versus farm account, right? Or a lower level account versus a higher level account, right? Because I've seen it where people have their second or third accounts, that will join an alliance, right? Even though the power might still be okay, or maybe it's actually a little bit lower, where it's pretty clear, hey, this is just a farm account. First and foremost, I don't think that you should allow any farm accounts to be joining what we would consider truly to be a main alliance, right? Doesn't mean they have to be the number 1 alliance or the A team or the first string. We're not saying that. But respectfully, if you're worried about spies, I would say unless you know it's your farm, and more specifically, there's only really certain reasons you should be having a farm join a main alliance, you really should not allow farm accounts to join the main alliance, right? Then the other thing you have to look at is what are the power of people that are joining, because sometimes you can kind of get a feel for, hey, and this is one of the things we'll talk about in a bit, but if you have someone who's, I'll give you an example. If let's say your alliance is 1 billion power, but you have someone who's, 1 million power that joins, right? I mean, that potentially could be, a lower level farm. If they're like 2, 3, 4, 5 million, right, that could even be something that would indicate a second account. It could also be a main account, but usually those are things where it's like, hey, it's not really a red flag, but it's more of like an orange caution sign, right? Just something to kind of keep your eyes on, right? Because it's obviously not something that's a 100K account. That's obviously a little more clearer to be a farm. Next one here is going to be number 4, activity audits. So activity audits is really important because this can actually tell you a lot on if you track things, for example, like power growth, if you track donations, and if you track build time, if you track PvP points. Those are all things that you can really use to factor in. Sometimes farm accounts may not have a lot of growth, right? If they're not playing it, because sometimes, now bear in mind, it obviously depends if it's the farm or if it's their main account that is joining in the alliance. If it's the main account and they're spying, it actually is a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a detriment, but it's not as much of a win as sometimes people think, because you're taking that fighting power away from the opposition, even though they're trying to get a leg up. So there are some things you can look at as not really the biggest wins in those cases, especially if you're limiting the information, right, that you're disseminating out in specific ways and kind of trying that tactic first, or at any point, I should say. So then you get into the activity audits, right? And those things will tell you, like I said, who's really fighting, who's doing the donating, who's powering up, right? Are you seeing large power spikes in everyone, or are you seeing, or average power spikes in everyone, or are there some people where you're seeing lower power spikes in them? And then, how do their numbers look across the other metrics? Those are ways that you can either, of course, try to figure out inactivity, which, again, if the spy is potentially being inactive. This is one of the other ways that you can root out spies, is that if you require everyone to have a certain level of activity, if it's in 2, 3, or all of these areas, that can be a way to weed them out, right? Especially if it's not a main account, or if it is a main account, but you just have specific standards, you could just end up removing the spy just due to general activity, right? Because maybe they just can't keep up. So even though that might apply to the majority of people, I've seen some spies that are like super dedicated. They're all in, they talk in alliance chat, they do everything, they go out there and they'll fight against their teammates just so, again, they try to hide in plain sight, right, by really fully. Now that to me is not the norm. Those are more of the super dedicated ones that just kind of go above and beyond. However, by constantly keeping players to a specific standard, I do feel that that is another way to vet them out, even if it's kind of indirectly and passively doing what you normally do, where you might just end up getting rid of them without even knowing it, right? Next one is if you notice that people are changing their names. This is why it's important to write names down. I think that, and this is number 5. So this is really important because if you notice that there's certain players that are changing their names often, not to say that this will always be indicative of rooting out or finding a spy, but I have noticed this is something I've seen before, where spies will just randomly change their name at certain intervals, because in their minds, they're thinking, well, if the alliance is doing activity audits or audit checks of players, then if I change my name every once in a while, that might mess up how they're taking in their data, because then if they change their name and you don't know, maybe you go off power, and maybe there might still be other ways that you can figure out who that person is. But I've seen that happen before, and I've then heard from alliances where it's like, oh, well, we didn't know who this person was, we couldn't really figure it out, so we just had to kind of reset their stats. So that can be something that if you notice name changes are happening and you can keep track of that, then that's important. One of the ways you can do this is by having someone or a few people send DM messages out to everyone. So that way, or what you do is you send a DM message for that person's current account name in that DM message, just so you have it planted there. And then when you go back and you look through the DMs, you'll be in, and I'm talking in-game DMs, you'll be able to see, oh, you typed their name out, and if they have a different name, then you'll know who they were before. 200 IQ level plays, if that's even a good IQ number. So let's get to number 6, which is, we talked about this kind of general information versus specific information. Figuring out how you can test and limit information that you're disseminating out to your alliance. If you're doing it kind of in a full head-on way that I described before, or if you're allowing kind of free-flowing information to be done, or if you're allowing bits and pieces of information, that is something you should think about, because that can really help in potentially identifying spies. Then let's get to number 7, which is looking at who recently joined. This is another really good indicator. Now, most of the time, when you're just starting out in your Season 1, spies, I mean, again, unless you are a big project, if you're a big project, or if you're, an alliance that's going in there kind of mega alliance style, and you're just loading in spenders, and people know that that's the case, and you have like another alliance or another project that's also going to be going to the same kingdom you are, right? Again, you have to hit a couple prerequisites here. Then that can be something where you might get an early spy that joined. I've had situations in projects I've ran because, again, as just being a creator and being a little bit more I don't even want to say mainstream, but I'll just say being a little known, right, when it comes to running projects and kingdoms. I've had situations where spies have joined projects just right away, right, with the intent of going to other alliances or having some friends that wanted to go to the same kingdom, and they just joined just to be a part of it, see how things are being done, try and get a lay of the land, and then figure out how they can best do whatever they wanted to do. And so in those cases, right, you might not really be able to vet those people out early, just because of how usually when you're starting out in a new kingdom, sure, you'll have standards, but most of the time it's not as strict as it would be in like the end of the season, as an example, right? Because you're really still trying to establish your foundation. You're trying to keep as many people engaged and keep retention as high as possible. And so in those cases where you have that situation happen, it can be a little bit more challenging. However, what we're really talking about is those single alliances that may or may not be a part of projects, but typically once you kind of get to this stage, like for example in a season 2 where this could be a little bit more prone compared to maybe season 1, looking at people who recently joined your alliance can be a way where you can figure out, oh, well, if this person recently joined and then all of a sudden you start noticing that, well, now we're seeing an increase or an uptick in counterattacks or taking advantage of our downtimes, or hey, why do they have 100 people on when we were trying to test out a different attacking time, but it seems like they responded just super fast or were already prepared. Those could be indicators as well to pay attention to. The next one here, which I think is 8 or 9 maybe if we're on, who participates versus who doesn't. This could be another thing, right? Where, once again, kind of similar to doing the activity audits. If you're noticing that you're not getting people that are participating maybe in raids, or at least showing interest, right? Because you can't have 100 people doing every single raid. But if you're noticing that a certain amount of people just aren't interested, or if, for example, even on the PvP side, which clearly, almost everyone can really participate in that. If you're noticing people aren't really showing up for that, obviously with some of the other activity audits, those are things that you could also use as a way to factor in and gauge if people are potential spies or not. Then we get to the next one, right? Setting traps, right? This is kind of what we talked about before when we mentioned things like DMs, right? This is kind of a way of setting traps for players, where whether you mail and you send messages out to every single person here on each rank, or if, for example, you send DMs out to the 20 people that last joined and you just send that specific DM to them. It doesn't have to be people that are of a certain rank. It could be the last 20 people that joined the alliance. It could be your 20 or 25 lowest powered players. Think about creative ways on how you can kind of approach and find groups within the alliance from different subsets or different sets, and then how you can kind of tinker with messages to figure out, okay, well, I can send this and then do that. And then the next one is using ranks to keep players where they kind of need to be vetted still. And this is a very simple one that I think most alliances probably already do, but it is something that you can also use to factor into figuring out or finding where spies are, right? So if you're an alliance that's just kind of a solo alliance or an independent alliance, maybe you're not a part of a bigger group or bigger project right before you went into the kingdom, then this would be a little bit, I think, easier for you to do, where you would say, well, hey, we'll just keep everyone at rank 1 until, for example, they show that they're consistently participating. You look at their numbers across the board when it comes to activity audits, for maybe they join the Discord, and then you say, okay, well, after a little bit of time, then we'll bump you up to rank 2, right? And then we're like, okay, you are a core member of the alliance because you have shown over a period of time, whether that's over weeks, a month, or 2 months, that you are really here for the right reasons. And then you get to what rank 3 would be, which would probably be more of your core fighters, right? So you would say the people who are fighting all the time, are on the top 50% of the boards, or whatever percentage you guys want to go off of, that are over a certain merit point, will bump you up to rank 3. And then you can even do something like, hey, we'll just reset that every season. So again, you can have certain ways that you go about it. I think that's a very simple way to do it that can potentially vet out some spies, or at least give you some information on, right, for example, well, I don't know if I would say vet, but like making them work for it, right? You don't want to make it easy for spies to get information or to work their way up in the ranks or to get things. You want to make it just as difficult for them as it would be for an average member, right? Or as much as you want to say that, for them to kind of prove, right, their loyalty and their worth or their interest, their engagement, their enjoyment, right, for being a part of the alliance, right? You almost want to make the spy feel like you're tricking them psychologically to integrate themselves as a full member, right? You want to basically think about this. Even if you have a spy, you want to make that spy work for you, right? This would be the last good piece of advice I'll give you. I mean, there's great advice all over, but this would be my pro tip: is make that spy do everything that a regular member would, and you hold everyone as accountable. So even if a spy is or is not mixed into your alliance, you're getting the same production level out of them as you would an average member, right? To the point of the longer they stay in there, the more they're just going to keep working for you. Right, so kind of play the strengths and advantages, right, when you're weighing out the disadvantages, right? And then the very last thing I'll say for those of you that are still here, if you are somewhat in a leadership position or in an officer position, is don't dwell on it too much, right? Don't let that be the thing that succumbs your mental state on, oh my gosh, we have a spy, what are we going to do? We're constantly again, sure, apply these things because I do think they're going to help, but don't let it be something that just consumes your entire world. Right, because that is meant as far as in your mental space, that's not healthy to always be constantly worrying about it. Right, approach it from a little bit more of a pragmatic way, where it's okay. This is what's happening. Let's try this, this, and this, and let's just keep it moving. Right, and if something comes of it, then it does, and if it doesn't, no worries. Right, and I think that is a better way to approach it from a mental headspace than the opposite, where you're just always worried all the time. With that in mind, I am going to finish this off here. Obviously, shout out to KPT, Keepers of Tamaris, and Madame Slayer. It's been such a joy hanging out with this group for this season 2. A lot of good people here. So obviously wouldn't be able to kind of do this without being an alliance to show off some of these things. With that in mind, I'd like to know from you now, if you've ever been an alliance that has dealt with a spy, what are some things that you did to figure out the spy? Anything that's similar to what I mentioned, maybe some things that you approached differently, and then were you able to find the spy or find them, or did you just notice that now the other alliance or alliances stopped responding so quickly, and that gave us the indication that the spy left, as an example, right? So I'd love to know what you guys did, because I think reading through some of the comments for others might be able to find some uplifting tactics or strategies that they can apply right to their own situations. Let us know there in the comments down below. That's going to do it for me as always. Until next time, I will catch you later.